The rain came down in sheets over the Virginia countryside, a relentless gray curtain that turned the late afternoon into something resembling dusk. On the sprawling property of a retired Master Chief Petty Officer, the weather matched the mood of the small gathering inside the main house. Friends, family, and former teammates had congregated to offer support, their voices a low murmur that struggled against the drumming on the roof. In the center of the quiet storm sat Marcus Thorne, his broad frame looking diminished in his favorite armchair. A complicated-looking brace encased his leg, a tangible reminder of the IED blast in the Korengal Valley that had ended his 20-year career as a Navy SEAL. The physical therapy was grueling, but it was the silence in his own head that was the real battle. He felt hollow, scraped out. His wife, Lena, moved through the room with the practiced grace of a hostess, ensuring cups were full and plates were offered, her eyes constantly flicking back to him. She was his anchor, the one who could pull him back from the dark precipice his mind often wandered towards. Among the guests was a man Marcus didn't know well, a friend of a friend named Dr. Aris Thorne. No relation, just a shared common last name. Aris was a civilian trauma surgeon, but the word doctor felt inadequate for a man with his particular history. He was a reservist who had just returned from his third deployment, and this time not as a surgeon in a secure field hospital, but as an independent duty corpsman, or IDC, the highest enlisted medical authority, operating with a Marine Corps Special Operations team. He was the tip of the spear in battlefield medicine. He was quiet, with the calm, observant eyes of someone who had learned to read people in moments of life and death. The conversation in the living room drifted, as it always did with this crowd, towards old missions, close calls, and in the brotherhood. Marcus listened, offering a tight-lipped smile here and there, but he felt detached, a ghost at his own wake. The stories were his life, yet they felt like they belonged to someone else. He excused himself, the effort of hauling his braced leg up the stairs a welcome physical pain that drowned out the mental one for a moment. He needed air, or solitude, or both. Upstairs, he stood by the window in his study, watching the rain assault the glass, and he didn't hear the soft footsteps on the stairs or the gentle knock on the open door. It was only when Aris spoke that he turned. "Mind if I steal a moment of quiet?" Aris asked, his voice low and even, carrying a tone that wasn't really a question. It was an offer of companionship without the pressure of conversation. Marcus shrugged. "Quiet's about all I'm good for these days." Aris moved to stand at the other window, looking out at the same storm. They stood in silence for a full minute. You two men comfortable with the absence of words. It was a military thing, Marcus knew. The ability to share a space, a watch, a burden, without filling the air with noise. Finally, Aris spoke, his gaze still on the rain. "Tough adjustment. The leg, I mean. But it's not the leg that keeps you up at night." It wasn't a question. Marcus felt a flicker of annoyance, the instinct to deflect, to tell this stranger to mind his own business. But there was no judgment in Aris's tone, not only a flat statement of fact. It was the same clinical, calm way a good medic would note a patient's symptoms. "You a shrink now, Doc?" Marcus asked, the edge in his voice dulled by exhaustion. Aris almost smiled. "No, just a guy who's seen a lot of guys looking out of a window at the rain." That simple statement hung in the air. It was a recognition, a password that opened a door Marcus hadn't realized he'd left unlocked. He turned from the window, his movements slow and deliberate, and lowered himself onto the edge of an old leather sofa. He gestured for Aris to take the chair opposite. "I had a good team," Marcus began, his voice a low rumble. "The best. We were on a reconnaissance mission, high in the mountains. The intel was bad. We walked into an ambush that was waiting for us like they knew we were coming." Aris leaned back, his expression attentive but neutral. He didn't pull out a notepad or offer platitudes. He simply listened. The firefight was insane. We were pinned down, taking fire from 3 directions. Callahan, my point man, went down first. Took a round through the neck. I saw it happen. I saw the blood spray. My medic, a kid named Reynolds, he was already working on another guy. I was the lead. My job was to get us out of the kill zone, to call in support. But all I could see was Callahan. I made a choice. I broke cover. I grabbed Callahan and dragged him behind a rock. I was trying to stop the bleeding. My hands were covered in his blood and I was screaming for Reynolds. Marcus stopped, his jaw tight. The memory was visceral, a film playing behind his eyes. He could smell the cordite, the copper of blood, the sharp scent of pine. Reynolds got to us. He was a genius with his hands. He got a clamp on the artery, got an airway in. He saved Callahan's life right there in the middle of a firestorm. But while he was working, while I was providing cover, a round hit my leg. It felt like a baseball bat swung by a giant. I went down. The team covered us. We got extracted. Callahan lived. Reynolds got a silver star. I got a medevac and a ticket home. Eris nodded slowly. Sounds like you made the right call. Did I? The question was raw, ripped from somewhere deep. I was the team leader. My job was the mission, the team's survival as a whole. I risked myself, and by extension, the security of the team, for one man. If I'd been killed, as if I hadn't been able to call in the extract, we all could have died. Reynolds could have died trying to save both of us. My leg got me out of the fight for good. I left them. I left my team. The confession poured out. The guilt he'd been carrying, the certainty that his act of heroism was actually a catastrophic failure of leadership. He expected Eris to offer the usual reassurances. You did what any of us would have done. He was your brother. You had to try. But Eris just sat there, his face unreadable. When Eris finally spoke, his voice was so soft, Marcus had to lean in to hear him over the rain. That's a heavy load to carry, the weight of a choice. He paused, his eyes losing focus for a moment, looking inward. It reminds me of something, a different place, a different team. The air in the room shifted. Marcus could feel it. Eris was no longer just a listener. He was about to become a storyteller. I was with a MARSOC team in a small village in Helmand Province, Eris began, his voice taking on a measured, rhythmic quality. We were doing a key leader engagement trying to build trust with the village elder. It was supposed to be a soft op. We had a couple of interpreters with us, including a young woman named Amira. She was brilliant, fearless, spoke 5 languages. She was our bridge to the local people, our best asset for winning hearts and minds. Marcus listened, and the image of a female interpreter in a combat zone immediately striking him as both brave and incredibly vulnerable. During the meeting, we started taking fire from a building on the edge of the village. It was a well-coordinated ambush. The team moved to engage, to suppress the threat. I was in the courtyard with the elder and Amira, trying to get them to cover. In the chaos, Amira went down. She just crumpled. I ran to her. She'd been hit in the chest. The round had gone through her lung. And she was conscious, her eyes wide with terror and pain, gasping for air. Eris's hands were resting on his knees. They were perfectly still, but Marcus could see a faint tremor in his fingers. He was reliving it, just as Marcus had. I started working on her. Got a chest seal on the wound, started an IV, tried to keep her calm. My entire world shrank to the space of that courtyard, the sound of her ragged breathing, the smell of dust and blood. The firefight was raging around us, but it was background noise. My only mission was her. He took a slow, deliberate breath. While I was working on her, one of the team's dog handlers, a big guy named Kowalski, moved to a position to give us better cover. He was laying down, suppressing fire from the rooftop. I heard the call on the radio. Kowalski's moving to the roof. Then, nothing. Then, Kowalski's hit. I didn't look up. I didn't call for a status. I didn't even acknowledge it. I had my hands inside Amira's chest. And if I took them away, she would die. I heard the team leader screaming for a corpsman, screaming my name. I heard the panic in his voice, a sound I'd never heard before, but I didn't move. I couldn't move. The tremor in Aris's fingers was more pronounced now. He clasped his hands together to still them. I stayed with Amira. I worked on her until the QRF arrived and we could get her on a bird. She was stabilized. She lived. She lived because I stayed. He finally looked up and met Marcus's eyes. His gaze was clear, but there was an ocean of pain behind it. Kowalski bled out on that rooftop. He died because his medic was in a courtyard saving someone else. Someone who wasn't even in the military. The confession landed in the room like a physical blow. The silence that followed was absolute, deeper than the quiet before. Marcus stared at Aris, his own guilt suddenly put into a stark, terrifying perspective. And he had risked his team for one of their own. Aris had let one of his own die to save a civilian. "You were following orders," Marcus said, his voice thick. "Your primary duty was to the casualty. Triage. You did what you were trained to do. The greater good." Aris let out a short, humorless laugh. "Greater good. Tell that to Kowalski's wife. Tell that to his kids. I've played that moment in my head 10,000 times. What if I'd been faster? What if I'd stabilized Amira in 60 seconds and then moved? What if I'd trusted one of the other guys to do basic first aid on her while I ran to him? The what-ifs are a special kind of hell, aren't they, Master Chief?" Marcus nodded slowly, the connection between them now forged in the hottest fire. Two leaders, two medics in a way, who had been forced to make impossible choices in the chaos of combat. Choices that saved one life and, in their own minds, cost another. "I talked to Kowalski's wife," Aris continued, his voice barely a whisper. "After I got back, I went to his funeral. I stood in front of his casket and I couldn't say a word to her. I just stood there. She came up to me afterwards. She knew who I was. She knew I was the corpsman with his team. I braced myself for the accusation, the tears, the hate. She just looked at me, with these eyes that were so tired, and she said, 'He always said you were the best. He said if he ever got hit, he'd want you working on him. Thank you for being there for him.'" A tear escaped and traced a path down Aris's cheek. He didn't wipe it away. "She was thanking me for letting her husband die. I didn't know what to say. I still don't." Marcus felt a lump in his own throat the size of a fist. He thought about his own situation, his own guilt over leaving his team. He had been lauded as a hero for saving Callahan. But in his mind, he had failed. Daenerys had done what was arguably the more logical, the more correct thing in the cold calculus of battlefield medicine, and he was drowning in guilt for the life he couldn't save. There was no right answer. There was only the aftermath and the ghosts. The rain had softened to a gentle patter. The storm was passing. "I saw a lot of things over there," Marcus said, his voice rough. "A lot of young men and women do things they never thought themselves capable of. Terrible things, heroic things. But the hardest thing, the thing no one trains you for, is living with the choices you made when there were no good choices." Aris nodded. "The silence is the hardest part. Back home, everyone wants to hear the war stories, the adrenaline. They don't want to hear about this. About the quiet moments in a dusty courtyard, or the weight of a man in your arms while bullets fly. So you don't say a word. No one says a word. And the silence becomes its own kind of enemy." They sat in the quiet of the study, the storm's end bringing a new, peaceful stillness. Two strangers who had just shared the deepest, most painful parts of themselves. No judgment had passed between them, no platitudes, no attempts to fix anything, There was just the profound relief of being truly heard, of having your particular personal hell acknowledged by someone who had visited a similar one. Downstairs, the murmur of voices continued, punctuated by the clink of glasses. Lena glanced up the stairs, a small worried frown on her face. She trusted Marcus, but she worried about his solitude. She didn't know that, in that upstairs room, her husband was finally not alone. After a long time, Eris stood up. He moved to the window and pushed it open an inch. The fresh, clean scent of rain-washed earth filled the room. He took a deep breath. "You know," he said, turning back to Marcus, "Kowalski's kid, he's 10 now. I go see him. We play catch. I help him with his homework. His mom, she invites me for Thanksgiving. It doesn't make up for anything. It doesn't bring his dad back. But it connects me. It reminds me why we do what we do. It reminds me that the people we lose, they leave a hole, but they also leave a legacy. And sometimes the best way to honor them isn't to sit in the silence with our guilt, but to be there for the people they left behind." He held out his hand to Marcus. Marcus took it. The grip was firm, or a silent understanding passing between them. "Callahan," Marcus said. "He's in San Diego now. Works for a tech company. He emails me sometimes. I never write back." "Maybe you should," Eris said simply. "Maybe you need to hear his side of the story. The side of the man who was saved. It might not change your guilt, but it might give you a different perspective. A reason, amidst the chaos, for the choice you made." He let go of Marcus's hand and walked towards the door, and he paused on the threshold. "The leg will heal, Master Chief. The other thing, it doesn't heal. You just learn to live with it. You learn to carry it. And you learn that you don't have to carry it alone. No one said a word about it, but we both just did. That's a start." And then he was gone, his soft footsteps fading down the stairs. Marcus sat alone in his study, the open window letting in the cool, damp air. He looked at the rain-streaked glass, but this time, he wasn't just seeing the storm. He was thinking about San Diego and an email he might finally write. He was thinking about the weight on his own shoulders and how, for the first time in months, it felt just a little bit lighter, shared in the quiet understanding of a stranger who understood the heaviest silences of all.